another thing that we just got to talk about, realignment. And some of y'all are sick of hearing about realignment. I was checking my Twitter during that David Pollock segment, and one of y'all tweeted at me, man, I do not want to hear one more word about conference realignment. Listen, I hear you. I want things to stay the same. But the way that college football is trending right now, the music is playing, the teams are circling the conference chairs, and when that music stops, you had better have a chair. But the music's still playing right now. So what could be the next chair to get taken in the conference realignment saga? What's the next episode? What's the next thing that could happen as it pertains to this whole dramatic series? I think it's no secret the one that's been in the headlines the most is Florida State and Clemson leaving the ACC for either the SEC, maybe you say the Big Ten. The SEC makes a whole lot of sense to me. And the reasoning behind this is fairly obvious. I mean, Florida State's AD came out and said as much. These two schools right now are bringing much more into the ACC, and they're not getting nearly enough out of it. And not just getting enough out of it that they can't keep the lights on. They're fine in terms of finances to keep the whole machine moving. They're good there. But in respect to what they want to accomplish, in respect to expectations at Florida State and Clemson to win national titles, Florida State said as much. Hey, we're $30 million behind the SEC. And finances equates to power, and power equates to the opportunity to win a lot of games. And I'm not saying year to year they can't do it, but consistently, Florida State and Clemson need to have equal resources to compete at the level they expect to compete at. And so if the ACC can't cough up the money or change the distribution model, which I think is a tall task, they're going to look for greener pastures. And I promise you, the SEC would be more than happy. I'll say this. I believe the powers that hold the SEC's media rights would be more than happy for Clemson and Florida State to join that conference. The reason why I think this is imminent is because if you're the ACC and you want to find a way to keep Florida State and Clemson, you got to get them more money, right? Well, where does that money come from? The other schools. The pie ain't getting bigger, it looks like. Don't think it's getting bigger tomorrow, at least. So you have to go and knock on NC State's door and say, hey, listen, man, you know the deal. We're trying to keep Florida State around. We're trying to keep Clemson around. Spare a few bucks. Bam. Door just closed right in their face. That's how that's going to go. These schools aren't going to give up more money to give it to Florida State and Clemson. Who are we kidding? So these schools are on the move, I believe, sooner rather than later. We'll see how soon. But I've said this before. I understand it's a lot of money. There's different conversations around how much. I believe the number 100-ish million has been thrown out. I've also heard 500-ish million has been thrown out. All I'm saying is these people have a lot of money, have a lot of power. Things can change quick, fast, in a hurry. Think about Oklahoma and Texas. It was done one day. It's not going to happen. They're not going to the SEC. They're not going to go to the SEC early. The next week, the whole narrative changes. Guess where they're going? The SEC, and guess when they're doing it early? A week's time came between those two storylines. So just keep an eye on this. Oregon and Washington, I believe, are going to leave the Pac-12 here. I think that's probably one of the next things to happen. Before we get into that, though, make sure to subscribe to the On3 YouTube channel. The Hard Count is live twice a week. We got content for you every single day. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at JDPiquel. Like I was saying, Oregon and Washington, I don't see a world where they can stay in the Pac-12 for a couple of reasons here. The media rights conversation, according to storylines at least, does not seem inspiring. I mean, there's a lot of memes out there that are really funny, but and the unfortunate part is there's some truth to them, right? Like Ion Television, Apple, like I don't know that those keep the big brands home. Now, maybe they do, but I have a hard time believing that they're going to stay for Ion Television or Apple TV Plus in streaming when they have other bigger media deals that would surely take them in. The other thing, this is the same deal we said with Clemson and Florida State. Oregon and Washington are big brands. I mean, they are pulling more than their fair share of the weight in the Pac-12 conference, especially with USC and UCLA leaving in 2024 for the Big Ten. Oregon and Washington are looking around saying, who's paying for all this? Who's doing all this heavy lifting? We're like the Nick Breaks, and we have no other Nick Breaks around us to help heavy lift right now in the Pac-12 conference. Shout out Nick Break, producer for this show. But you hear what I'm saying. At a certain point, you look around and say, we are putting in too much, and we're not getting enough out. For that reason, Mark Cuban style, I'm out. So they would be attractive to a lot of these different conferences because think about the way this whole game is changing. It used to be very regional. It's starting to stretch beyond that. The Big Ten getting USC and UCLA pretty much broke down those imaginary fences from a regional standpoint. Anybody would be excited to get Oregon and Washington for that reason. Maybe it's the Big Ten to continue their stretch towards the West. Maybe it's the Big 12 to get back in the game and stay relevant. That's also another thing. If you land in Oregon or a Washington, that's a really impressive chair to land if you're a conference. That's a lot more revenue you bring into your overall pie. It's a very big slice that you add. So Oregon and Washington, I don't see a way they stay in the Pac-12 if all things stay equal. The media rights deal, like I said, is uninspiring. USC and UCLA kind of put the writing on the wall. Oregon and Washington, I think, could be out the door in the near future. So those are the first two that I would say are the most likely, just based on the rumblings and sort of the way that you fit all the puzzle pieces together. Here's one that I don't know is the most imminent, but one that I do think is on the board to happen soon, and that's Notre Dame is going to join a conference. Notre Dame, been independent for what feels like forever. They have a deal with NBC that expired in 2025. I don't know this is all about money for Notre Dame, and that sounds kind of weird to say with conference realignment because the Greenbacks are making the calls right here. Guys with MBAs and guys that went to law school are making the calls right here, not necessarily fans. But if you're Notre Dame, think about it this way. The playoff expands in 2024. At what point does it hurt Notre Dame to not be playing on conference championship weekend? And if you're not playing on conference championship weekend and you get left out of the college football playoff, I'm telling you, that only has to happen one time. And I think Notre Dame's going to start going into shopping mode. Whether it's, hey, we're shopping to find a conference or we're shopping ourselves for a conference to find us, like at that point in time, I think the money from a TV rights deal is still a big piece of it. But you understand competing for national titles, being competitive at the highest level, like Florida State's talking about, if you're not doing that, and that's the expectation of Notre Dame, then you start to have other conversations. Then it starts to be, hey, we're all for this media rights thing. That's extremely important. That's probably tied for most important, but also up there, winning. Winning also makes us a whole lot of money. All right? And to do that, we may need to join a conference soon. So we'll see when that happens. That's a whole other conversation to have, but Notre Dame, I think, will join a conference sooner rather than later. Don't know if it's the first one to happen. It's just a feel I have on it, but sooner rather than later. But again, Florida State and Clemson leaving the ACC, or Oregon and Washington leaving the Pac-12 would be the first two off the board that I'd keep a very close eye on. No pun intended, Nick Break. No pun intended with the eye on as an eye on television as it pertains to the media rights for the Pac-12. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.